All right, all right. Welcome back to the Hoplite channel, everyone. Once again, I am your host, Hop. I appreciate you tuning in for this video that you clicked on. Samurai Lit, Yamamoto Tsunetomo, Part 3. So it's been a couple days since I finished Part 2 for Tsunetomo, and I found myself going back through Hagakure and reading the passages and realized there are a lot left that we haven't covered yet. So for the interest of the viewer, instead of hearing me talk about what's going to be covered, I figured this portion we would do more readings. This will be more reading heavy. So we'll do another historical discussion before we get to the readings, but it'll be brief, and we'll move on to passage discussion for this third and final part. So let's talk about Hagakure itself. As I said in the first video, Hidden by the Leaves is the translation of Hagakure from Japanese into English. And it was completed in 1716, and the idea behind the name, I couldn't find a whole lot of reference material, why it was called Hidden by the Leaves. But my gut tells me that Tsunetomo was trying to say that the essence of Bushido for the samurai was something that was hidden for most Bushi. Most warriors could not decipher the true path of Bushido as they were taught. According to him, though, that if you looked behind that which was presented to you, the leaves as it were, as you parted the leaves and you could see the forest through these trees, the idea of Bushido, the essence of it, the spirit of the warrior's way would become clearer through his handbook to a samurai, which he called the Hagakure, which was hidden by the leaves. I believe that's the reason behind the name, Hidden by the Leaves. But in any event, the work itself remained obscure for about 200 years. It was written by a scribe who followed Yamamoto Tsunetomo around during his day-to-day life. I believe 1709 was when the transcriptions began. And they were just musings. They were lessons from Tsunetomo to his scribe when he had adopted his lifestyle as a monk, as Yamamoto Jocho. But despite the fact that the work became very popular, for 200 years it was quite obscure. We don't know if there were many copies written or printed, and we don't know if anyone of any notoriety had critiqued or endorsed the Hagakure itself. So for 200 years in Japan and abroad, it was relatively unknown. It was very esoteric knowledge. And this may have been because it was written during a period of national peace, and this peace was due to the consolidation of power by the Tokugawa Shogunate. And as I said in the previous series dedicated to Yagyu Munenori and even Tako and Soho, it was Tokugawa Ieyasu who had won the war, and the Battle of Sekigahara was where he became the unquestioned shogun, consolidated power and ruler of Japan fell to Ieyasu after the decisive Battle of Sekigahara. And it was his son Hidetada and his grandson Iemitsu that the shogunates were passed. And during this period, you could say there was roughly 100 to 150 years of relative peace. There was no national war of any, I guess you would say, fame or of issue. There was no national crisis as an invasion from Mongols or any campaign led against Korea or China during this period. So it's believed that Tsunetomo, because he was so enwrapped with the Bushido and his desire to follow through with what this virtuous code commanded, he could have felt slighted by the fact that he was born in this era, that he did not have the opportunity to go through war or combat or conflict the way Miyamoto Musashi or Yagyu Munenori were able to. And he thinks that perhaps because of their day and age, they gained the fame that he could not. So he felt Hagakure was his his work that was going to be left to the world. And as you read it, it does have a definite, I guess you would say, character or flavor of nostalgia for more feudal times, for more bellicose times, where Bushido was put to the test, where it was a man in his armor versus a man in his armor, a man with his samurai on one side versus a man and his samurai on the other. And it was my daimyo versus yours, the shogun that we had coalesced around versus your shogun, and who would be the victor. This was the whole crux of Bushido, was glorious military combat with the virtues of honor, duty, benevolence, righteousness, etc. At their behest, to take these virtues into combat and to either die a hero's death or to win fame and glory on the battlefield and to die with fame and glory at some later date. But he stresses this in Hagakure, that a samurai's life is simply a matter of life and death, and that the two should have no distinction. So a samurai should live his life as though he is already dead, as there is no difference between life and death. Everything he does should not take into account the preservation of life or the impending doom of death. That to die with honor, using Bushido, was just as good as living a life where Bushido could be practiced into old age. So what happened after this period that Hagakure was written in? Well, it went underground for a while, but then we saw a resurgence in popularity, and this was around World War II. And the resurgence came as Japan entered the war, and we see how the militaristic spirit, the Shinto spirit of Japan, was reignited with this worldwide conflict, the likes of which the world had never seen, as far as a conflict that almost touched every square inch of the globe. So the resurgence was noted first and foremost among the kamikaze pilots of World War II. And the kamikaze is translated into English as the divine wind, the spiritual wind of the gods that will bring death and destruction upon the enemies of Japan. And it's said that there are accounts that kamikaze pilots would actually take headbands and wrap their heads in these headbands like the samurais of old. And on these headbands they would script and write passages from the Hagakure to give them that Shinto nationalistic spirit, that rallying cry, that mantra that all life is death and all death is a life. And that to be a good samurai, to be a master of Bushido, you must master your fear over death. You must become that divine wind and commit suicide, but in glorious fashion for your Lord, for your emperor, on behalf of your nation of Japan. And you will be remembered for the ages for having done this, for having self-sacrificed on account of Bushido, on account of your country, on account of your emperor. In the Western world, we look at this as insanity, to use your life and torpedo yourself into a ship with the hopes of sinking it because your country is now so desperate that you have been brought to a position where it is either surrender or it is catastrophic defeat, where who knows what will happen. And as we know from history, the atomic bombs happened on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it was there that the spirit of Japan was broken by the Allies, in particular America. But for a long time, it was suspected that because of this Bushido spirit in Japan's military, there may have never been a surrender, had the crippling destruction of the two atomic bombs not brought them to a position where they had to admit that they must surrender or their country would forever cease to exist. So this brought us into the postmodern Bushido era in the industrial and eventually the atomic age. How would Bushido continue into the modern age with industrialization of militaries and with the atomic bomb and the atomic age right behind it? Bushido started to show its age in this regard, and that there was no more glory in combat anymore. I don't know if it was Ernest Hemingway who said, but in the future, there will be no more glory in combat. You will die face down the mud, and it will be for no good reason at all. I'm not sure if this is Hemingway. It may have been someone else. I'll look it up. But this was combat in the industrial and in atomic age. There would be wholesale slaughter as a bomb was dropped in the middle of your city, and it would just vaporize buildings, people, and animals as if they were dried leaves in the fall wind. There was no honor in this combat. There was no glory. There was no stories to be told from such warfare. This was a dishonorable way of fighting, but this was an effective way of fighting. And I think the samurai would have agreed, as would Tsunetomo and the military of Japan in the 40s, that the new age had dawned, and perhaps Bushido had sung its swan song with the kamikaze pilots. I do believe, though, that Tsunetomo would have been proud of kamikaze pilots. As crazy and as, I guess you would say, desperate as they seemed, that is what Tsunetomo said a samurai should be. He should fight as though he is desperate. He should fight as though he is an insane man. And on that note, let's continue on with the readings from Hagakure, and I will provide a read-along as I always do. We jump to page 37. And Tsunetomo wrote, "A warrior should not say something faint-hearted, even casually. He should set his mind to this beforehand. Even in trifling matters, the depth of one's heart can be seen. A person who is said to be proficient at the arts is like a fool. Because of his foolishness in concerning himself with just one thing, he thinks of nothing else and thus becomes proficient. He is a worthless person." Okay. That one's okay. Well, the first one we could say it's definitely the Tsunetomo take on Bushido, in that in all things you do, you should not be careless. And especially in your speech, because so much can come from speech that is either taken the wrong way or gets you into trouble, perhaps because you intended to arouse trouble, but you do not know how far that trouble will go. So you should never use your speech or any other mannerisms or customs you have as a means of communicating something carelessly. This should always be at the forefront of your mind. What you say, what you do, these all have consequences. Even trivial consequences can amount to large consequences down the road. But this is interesting, the second part. He says, a person who is said to be proficient at the arts is a fool, because he will focus on one proficiency and he thinks nothing of anything else and thus becomes proficient. He is worthless. So what he is saying here is that dedication to one art and mastery of that one art is foolishness, and that person is worthless. So that you should diversify your attentions into other things, and that your attention to the other arts, the other passions, the other facets of life should be more in keeping with the Bushido. But that's interesting, because he does contradict himself in some of these passages where he says, oh, the arts is a waste of time. All that matters is Bushido. All that matters is you becoming a better samurai. But here he says that one who gives himself over to one art, perhaps Bushido or perhaps the katana or something in the martial arts, this is the sign of a worthless person, because they disregard all else except proficiency in this one art. Okay, we could say he's possibly contradicting himself in this passage, but the point is that if you ignore all other things except this one obsession, this one passion, this one art, this one profession, you will get tunnel vision. And it's very easy to let yourself be consumed by this passion or art. But you must not do this, because it will prohibit you from becoming decent or perhaps even versatile in other arts that will be of much use to you. Perhaps not now, but later in life, perhaps. So never just give yourself to one art and passion wholeheartedly. You can always pursue one passion with vigor, but never do so that you disregard all other things in life, or you might become worthless. Okay, next reading. We jump to page 43. And Tsunetomo wrote, "Whatever you do should be done for the sake of your master and parents. the people in general, and for posterity. This is great compassion. The wisdom and courage that comes from compassion are real wisdom and courage. When one punishes or strives with the heart of compassion, what he does will be limitless in strength and correctness. Doing something for one's own sake is shallow and mean and turns into evil. Okay, so this is, again, I guess the lighter side of Tsunetomo, where he's saying that whatever you do, do it for the sake of your master, for your parents, for your people. Don't do it just for your own sake, because this is the path to evil, to shallowness, to selfishness. And this is going back to the virtues of duty, benevolence, and righteousness. Do what is right, not for your sake or for the sake of itself, but for the sake of what purpose it's meant to serve. And never disregard your duty to your Lord, to your shogun, to your emperor, to your people, to your parents, to your country. And never fail to show benevolence in this duty, because this is true courage, this is true wisdom. To act rightly for the sake of other people who you are there to serve a purpose for is the correct way of administering your Bushido for the world. All right, next passage. This one's a little longer, but it's good. We jump to page 52. And he says, if one is asked what to do beyond this, it should be to fit oneself inwardly with intelligence, humanity, and courage. The combining of these three virtues may seem unobtainable to the ordinary person, but it is easy. Intelligence is nothing more than discussing things with others. Limitless wisdom comes from this. Humanity is something done for the sake of others, simply comparing oneself with them and putting them in the fore. Courage is gritting one's teeth. It is simply doing that and pushing ahead, paying no attention to the circumstances. Anything that seems above these three is not necessary to be known. All right. So it looks like he kind of modifies Bushido for himself here, and he takes the 7 or 8 virtues and condenses them down to 3. And he says these 3 are intelligence, humanity, and courage. And intelligence is nothing other than discussing things with your samurai, your contemporaries and friends, and finding out what the truth of the matter is through discussion. And then humanity is simply things done for the sake of others. And that courage is gritting your teeth and setting out to do something that you promised you would do, or you said you would do for your Lord, for your parents, for your country, etc. So these 3 things, intelligence, courage, and humanity, are really all you need, according to Tsunetomo, to see to it that the other 8 virtues of Bushido are also seen to. In a sense that these 3 virtues you can never neglect if you intend to perform the other 8. Without these 3, the other 8 are not possible. Intelligence, courage, and humanity. Yeah, okay. Move next to page 54. Tsunetomo wrote, there is surely nothing other than the single purpose of the present moment. A man's whole life is a succession of moment after moment. If one fully understands the present moment, there will be nothing else to do and nothing else to pursue. Live being true to the single purpose of the moment. Okay, this is a good one. This one is in line with Stoicism, in that you cannot sit around regretting what you could have done or what you should have done in the past. Nor should you think about the future as being a time to dread, or a time to desire, as in you look forward to it, or a time in which you think that it will be tedious and difficult and just a pain. You should live in the present moment, and you will find yourself moving from moment to moment into the future, thinking nothing but this present moment. What are my present circumstances? What are my orders? What do I have to do to ensure I'm successful? What isn't being done right now that needs to be done in order for success to occur? You must live in the present moment. Life is a succession of moment to moment. Don't jump ahead and think about the next moment. Don't think about the moment that just passed. Stay in the current moment, and you will be on the path of the samurai looking to Bushido as his way, and the moment that he encounters is the only moment in which he should practice the virtues that he has dedicated his life to. Okay, next reading. This is on page 70. And Tsunetomo wrote, When intimate friends, allies, or people who are indebted to you have done some wrong, you should secretly reprimand them and intervene between them and society in a good manner. You should erase a person's bad reputation and praise him as a matchless ally and one man in 1,000. If you will thus reprimand a person in private and with good understanding, his blemish will heal and he will become good. If you praise a person, people's hearts will change and an ill reputation will go away of itself. It is important to have the single purpose of handling all things with compassion and doing things well. Okay. This is actually something that's also taught in Western militaries and in Western hierarchies, that to be a good leader, you must embolden people to follow your leadership. And you do it through two means. Number one is those who you need to correct, you correct in private. To correct someone publicly is to bring them shame, is to expose their faults, is to single them out, and is to perhaps give the group an understanding that this person is the weak link and they cannot be trusted. Everybody at some point will be a weak link in the chain, but the weak link must be addressed in private so that he can correct his behavior in private and later bring correct behavior to public. If he has done something correct, he must be praised in public so that everyone can see that he is someone deserving of praise and an ally that they can fall back on as a strong chain in the link. This is the proper way that leaders embolden those that are beneath them, that are their inferiors if they are the superior, to be just as they are, that superior person who all people look up to for leadership and who trust that they will not be shamed and who believe that they will be corrected properly and praised publicly when they do something that is the benefit for the group. This is proper for leadership. It's the same adage that the leader is the first one to get up in the morning, and he's the first one to go to bed the last one to go to bed at night. And when he rises, he is the first one down to greet everyone as they go to eat, and he is the last person to get served food. And at the end of the day, he's the first person to greet everyone back at the chow hall, and he's the last person to be served dinner prior to going to bed. This is proper leadership. You show up first, you leave last. You praise in public, you correct in private. This is proper leadership. And I think this is a good lesson Tsunetomo leaves in this passage. Okay, moving on. We jump to page 82. Tsunetomo wrote, "A monk cannot fulfill the Buddhist way if he does not manifest compassion without and persistently store up courage within. And if a warrior does not manifest courage on the outside and hold enough compassion within his heart to burst his chest, he cannot become a retainer. Therefore, the monk pursues courage with the warrior as his model, and the warrior pursues the compassion of the monk." Right, so where do we think this lesson came from? Well, Tsunetomo, as I said with Izai Shizanshi, they were born around 1659, and they would be considered the grandchildren if they were in the lineage of the samurais Musashi, Yagyu Munenori, and the monk Takuan Soho. So I believe that Tsunetomo is using this lesson of the monk and the warrior to make a point that the warrior must learn his courage through his art, but he must also see to it that he does not become callous and cold-hearted. So he has to look to the monk as a model on how to foster compassion in his heart. The same thing with the monk. The monk can learn compassion through his studies as a priest, but he must look to the warrior on how to find the courage in his heart to maintain his lifestyle and to see to it that he is a good minister of the religion to the people for their benefit. So the warrior and the monk must look to each other for their respective strengths as models. And this goes back to Yagyu Munenori looking to his friend Takuan Soho, a monk, for insight on how to be a better samurai using Zen Buddhism. And I believe Takuan Soho, being a Zen Buddhist, was able to find courage in his own life by looking to the courage of his friend and master samurai swordsman Yagi Munenori. And I think Tsunetomo knew this relationship existed between the two men. Okay, next reading. I said there'd be a few on this one. We go to page 95. And Tsunetomo wrote, "It is said that every time the late Oki Hyobu's group gathered, and after all their affairs were finished, he would say, 'Young men should discipline themselves rigorously with intention and courage. This will be accomplished if only courage is fixed in one's heart. If one's sword is broken, he will strike with his hands. If his hands are cut off, he will press the enemy down with his shoulders. If his shoulders are cut away, he will bite through 10 or 15 enemy necks with his teeth. Courage is such a thing.'" All right. So he's talking about the virtue of courage, the backbone, the steel in the nerves, the ice in the veins the samurai must have if he is to follow through with his other virtues in Bushido and be a competent warrior if and when the time of battle comes. He must not look at a battle being lost until his life is lost. If he loses his sword, he still has his hands. If his hands are cut off, he still has his shoulders. And if his shoulders are cut away, he still has teeth with which to bite. This is courage. This is tenacity. This is the samurai spirit of never giving up, because if you fight as though you are already dead, you're not dead until you're dead. And if you don't have hands, if you don't have shoulders, you still have teeth. And if your head is cut from your shoulders, well, then you can say it's over. But not until that time can you ever say the fight is over and that defeat is a fait accompli. This is the mind a samurai must have when he looks at the virtue of courage and what it means and how it has to be practiced. All right. Next reading. We go to page 141. Tsunetomo wrote, "It is occasionally good to really overwhelm your opponent. Also, in addition to having spoken sufficiently, it is the highest sort of victory to teach your opponent something that will be to his benefit. This is in accordance with the way." Okay. What he's saying here is that sometimes it's good to let your opponent be overwhelmed for his own instruction. And actually, I have to admit, when I first started training in martial arts, whether it was Muay Thai or Krav Maga or BJJ or what have you, I oftentimes would insist that my instructor overwhelm me. And I mean, he agreed, but obviously within, restrictions, not just to, literally choke you out to the point where you don't learn anything, but to overwhelm you so that you know what it feels like to be in the presence of someone that is that far beyond you in skill, that is perhaps that far behind you in skill and in endurance and in strength. To be overwhelmed with endurance, skill, and strength is a scary thing. But you don't know who you are until you're in that moment, till you're brought to that point and you can say, wow, I really don't know what I'm doing when it comes to this, or wow, I need to be in better shape physically, or wow, I need to hit the gym and get stronger. Because without these three things, I am not going to be able to beat this man or even come close to it. So it's good to be overwhelmed from time to time, within reason. But this is what Tsunetomo was saying, and that so when a samurai overwhelms his opponent, he can later instruct him to give him sufficient knowledge on what he did wrong and what he did right. And this again is in keeping with the virtue of benevolence. To show benevolence to your opponent, if you do not mean to kill him, to overwhelm him and bring him to an understanding that he was beaten because of these things. This is how we learn. This is the benevolent instructor coming from a point of someone who was once a student, just as the person being overwhelmed will perhaps one day be an instructor as well. Okay, last reading. Tsunetomo wrote, "Like a tea kettle, it is easy for one's enthusiasm to cool. There is a way to keep this from happening. My own vows are the following: never to be outdone in the way of the samurai, to be of good use to the master, to be filial to my parents, to manifest great compassion, and to act for the sake of man." Okay, this is a great one to add on for part 3 of Tsunetomo and to finish the series. This was his daily mantra, as he said. Never to be outdone in the way of the samurai, to be of good use to the master, to be filial to parents, and to manifest great compassion and act for the sake of man. These were the things he had to remind himself daily so that he would not stray from his path, from his Bushido, that he would be a good samurai, even if it was in times of peace, even if conflict never came to him like it did Yagi Munenori or Miyamoto Musashi. He would still be that samurai that a person who respected Bushido and followed its ways would emulate. That this samurai, even though he lived in a time of peace, could be said to have been a fine example of what it meant to be in someone in keeping with the way of the warrior. Yeah, okay. If you hung around for the whole time, I appreciate it. That was a lot, but I figured I had to get through these readings, and they're great. They're great little snippets and paragraphs that teach good lessons, things to ruminate over, and things to think about as you go through your life. If it is through the martial arts or anything you may be struggling with personally, it's good food for thought. Okay, so I concluded Yamamoto Tsunetomo. We're going to move now into another part of the samurai literature series. I don't think I'll go to Miyamoto Musashi yet. As I said, he's my favorite. He's the Marcus Aurelius in my opinion of the samurai era. But yeah, we'll move on to the next book, and this is the final segment for Tsunetomo. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, thumbs up's always cool. If you're liking the channel overall, we could use more subscribers. Or if you want to share it with family, friends, any people you think might find it useful or intriguing. In any event, we will see you next time for the next part in the Samurai Literature series. Till then, and as always, take it easy.